This adventure is brought to you by our friends at Cryptid Crate, a monthly subscription box filled with cryptozoological and paranormal curiosities. Visit their website at cryptidcrate.com and use discount code SATURDAY for $10 off your first monthly subscription and 10% off any non-subscription purchase for your first order. Hi, I'm Anna, and on this week's Saturday Adventure, we're in New Jersey in search of a dinosaur. This was not my first dinosaur adventure. I have been all around the world and seen dinosaurs in every place, but this hadrosaur was no less than the very first, mostly complete dinosaur ever discovered. Before this hadrosaur was dug up out of the mud, paleontology was no different than cryptozoology, and terrible lizards like the Ankylosaurus were fantasy creatures akin to mermaids and unicorns. What happened in Haddonfield came very late in the geological timescale, so first, let's take this adventure back 65 million years. The Ankylosaur is my favorite dinosaur by far. This armored dinosaur lived beside Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops in the late Cretaceous period, more than 80 million years ago. Ankylosaurus' most notable feature was the heavy bony club on the end of a short, stiff tail. These clubs were a series of fused vertebrae that created a built-in morning star. Bone injuries on other dinosaurs, as well as Ankylosaurus, suggest the club was used in both defensive and ritual combat. Ankylosaurus was likely a vegetarian protecting a giant digestive system with the thick armored plates covering the rest of that body. Huge sinus cavities in the skull indicate this dinosaur was likely noisy at both ends. I found this Anky poking his head out of the tall grass at Prehistoric Gardens in Port Orford, Oregon. This little park opened in 1955, boasting 23 concrete dinosaurs and prehistoric creatures hiding amongst the Oregon rainforest. It was deja vu as I remembered the images of these same sculptures in the dinosaur books when I was little. There was a Lasmosaurus, a Stegosaurus, and even a Brachiosaurus poking its head between the trees. More than half a century of research has left many of these sculptures looking dated, but Prehistoric Gardens is still a fun stop off the Pacific Coast Highway. Apatosaurus might be the most famous dinosaur in all of history, but you probably don't know that name. Apatosaurus was described in 1877 by Othniel Charles Marsh. 2 years later, Marsh described a similar animal he named Brontosaurus. The reason the skeletons were so similar is that they were the same animal with incorrect skulls. Trust me, this wasn't even Marsh's biggest mistake. We'll discuss Marsh more in a little bit. It was Brontosaurus that captured the public attention as a waterborne menace in King Kong. Brontosaurus stampeded across the silver screen for decades. By 2015, science had finally convinced the public, more or less, that Brontosaurus doesn't exist. Apatosaurus reigned in museum galleries. A paper published that same year asserted that Marsh's original skeleton, Brontosaurus excelsius, was in fact a distinct species, plunging the sauropods into controversy once more. Sauropods were a diverse group of lizard-hipped dinos that lived through all three ages of the dinosaurs and have been uncovered on every continent, including Antarctica. The most notable feature of the sauropods are their long bodies, tiny heads, and their incredibly long tails and necks. From the Triassic to the Cretaceous, sauropods grew larger and larger until the titanosaurs reached up to 130 feet from nose to tail, the largest animals that have ever walked the earth. Next, I would like to introduce to you Stegosaurus. I believe you may already be acquainted, though what you know may not be true. When Marsh first described the Stegosaurus, he thought he'd found a kind of turtle with interlocking shingles over its back. Another misconception about the Stegosaurus is that it is so stupid that it needed a second brain to control the back half of its body. This erroneous belief is based on an enlarged cavity in the animal's hips. The back half of the Stegosaurus was the business end. At the tip of the dinosaur's tail were a series of spines that could be swung as a weapon. These appear to be defensive spines, though, as Stegosaurus was a vegetarian, just like me. This Stegosaurus lives in Bongoland in Port Orford, Florida. Bongoland was the dream of dermatologist Dr. Perry Sperber. Sperber was a pioneer of dermabrasion in Daytona Beach during the late 1940s, but his true love was history, and dinosaurs most of all. Bongoland initially featured scenes of life from Florida's history, including recreations of native villages and a herd of 40-foot concrete dinosaurs. The park was named for an ape that had been reported as both an orangutan and a chimpanzee. Bongoland closed quickly for lack of interest, but many of Sperber's dinosaurs still remained when the Dunlawton Sugar Mill Gardens opened the property as a public garden in 1985. Manny Lawrence, the original Bongoland sculptor, was brought back in 1989 to add Florida's giant sloth to the menagerie. Sadly, the Bongoland sculptures may not be around for much longer. In an interview, Perry Sperber mentions a Brontosaurus that once battled a Tyrannosaurus, but that sculpture was gone by the time I visited. The dinosaurs were constructed from concrete, chicken wire, and a little bit of rebar, and are hollow on the inside. 2 weeks after I was at Bongoland, the Tyrannosaurus collapsed in a rainstorm and was beyond repair. A subsequent inspection revealed that the youngest sculpture, the giant ground sloth, was in terrible condition. Sugar Mill Gardens are seeking donations to help save the sculptures that do remain. We're going to come forward in time for a moment and talk about the Bone Wars. Despite the metal name, the Bone Wars were actually a very embarrassing stain on science as a whole, perpetrated mainly by a man that we have already met several times, Othniel Charles Marsh. Marsh was the OG paleontologist. He had partnered with a naturalist professor named Joseph Leidy and his student, Edward Drinker Cope. The three took over operations in Haddonfield after William Folk dug his hadrosaur out of the stream bed. Marsh and Cope continued to work together for a time after Haddonfield, but a rivalry was growing. The proverbial pimple popped when Cope described a plesiosaur called Elasmosaurus, but placed the skull at the end of the animal's very short tail instead of its very long neck. Marsh published a paper that humiliated Cope. And from there, both became obsessed with who could collect and describe the most new dinosaurs. And they got a lot wrong. Paleontology may be an accepted science now, but a long time and a lot of dedicated research was needed to undo the damage done by Cope and Marsh as they attempted to outdo each other. It was the Triceratops that bore the most scars. We'll be talking about Triceratops and a lot more of your favorite dinosaurs next time in the final installment of the Haddonfield Hadrosaur.